Recent news involving polygamy groups next on Polygamy. What love is this? It seems like there's always something going on behind the scenes in polygamy groups that is eventually revealed. In fact, Jesus told us that all that is hidden will be revealed, right, Earl?
He told us in Mark chapter 4, verse 22, "For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light."
So sooner or later, it's all going to come to light anyway. Yep. And if it isn't revealed here in this life, it will be revealed in the next life. Today we want to talk about two different polygamy groups, a current event in property dispute in the All Red group in Pinedale, Montana, and another story that has come out about a young woman from the FLDS and her forced marriage and their life after. So first, the Pinedale community property problems. Now, this has to do with the law of consecration, where the polygamy groups take your money, take everything you've got, because it's the United Order. And so you need to know about that in order to get the gist of what this is about. Most all polygamy groups, the organized groups, are what they generally are involved with the United Order, and they call it the law of consecration. To explain the law of consecration, we're going to quote from the LDS Church.
Yeah, because in
website.
The temple, one of the things we do at the end is to consecrate our time, talents, energy, and everything which the Lord has blessed us.
And the polygamy groups do the same thing, and they take it to a whole new level of poverty for them.
So this is taken off the churchofjesuschrist.org website.
And they're explaining the law of consecration.
Yeah. The law of consecration is that we consecrate our time, our talents, and our money and our property to the cause of the church. Such are to be available to the extent they are needed to further the Lord's interest on earth. The law of sacrifice is that we are willing to sacrifice all that we have for the truth's sake, our character and reputation, our honor and applause, our good name among men, our houses, lands, and families, all things, even our very lives, if need be.
Okay, so that's the polygamy groups have picked up on this, and they have adopted. They believe much of the basics that the LDS Church started with.
Yeah.
And so our viewers need to realize that, as if you're not familiar with the polygamy group activities. So the law of consecration in polygamy groups means that they give all they are, all they will be, all they have, all they may have to the group, and that includes all money and all property. Now, some groups are more strict in what they take from the members. The Kingston group, for example, takes everything, even to the last paper clip. And the All Red group, the AUB, does not economically exploit their members that harshly, but they do encourage them to give all they can, and then a little bit more after that. Private property ownership is allowed by some groups, but not by others. There is currently a property dispute taking place with the AUB polygamy group community located in Pinedale, Montana. Now, the AUB has several different polygamy groups, mostly in the Intermountain West. We are going to quote from a news story about the dispute in the group that's in Pinedale, Montana.
Yeah, I think this is off of a radio or TV station, kpax.com.
Yeah, it's a television station. And it's located up in the Pinedale area.
In Montana. When a splinter group of Mormon fundamentalists founded the town of Pinedale more than 60 years ago, the hundreds of acres in the Bitterroot Valley were seen as a secluded haven, a place where its followers could live communally and practice polygamy without interference from the predominant church in Utah or the laws of Montana. Over time, those followers built their homes, their school, their church, all on land owned by the breakaway group, the Utah-based Apostolic United Brethren. The expectation was that the members' tithing and energy would benefit the church and the community.
Okay, so that kind of gives you a foundation of what's going on now up in the Pinedale area. The prophet or the leader of the AUB resides in Utah. The Pinedale, Montana community historically has been under the authority of the Utah leadership. Now, those living in the Pinedale community are almost all members of the AUB, or maybe there's a few friendly former members of the group living there, but most of them are members. The article reported that in the latest United States Census, 883 people lived in the Pinedale community. We quote more facts about the AUB from the news article.
For more than a decade, though, and amidst allegations of child molestation leveled against an AUB leader, some of those residents have sought to separate themselves from the church. Perhaps most critically, they want to own the land under their homes, the Montana Free Press reports. The AUB, made noteworthy in recent years by the popular reality TV show Sister Wives, isn't budging. It paid the taxes all these years. It maintains and continues to own the land. A Montana judge has been asked to sort out the peculiar circumstances. The Pinedale residents suing AUB say their livelihoods and freedom are at stake.
Okay, so they own the polygamy group owns the land, but the individual member owns the home.
The home's on top of the land.
So it's turning into quite the mess. The dispute is taking place is that those who want to disassociate themselves from the AUB group authority want to own the land under the homes that they own, and that's legitimate. We have a quote.
They claim that the law of consecration, a collectivist Mormon doctrine from the 1830s that encourages communalism through the sharing of resources, including a provision that promises eventual ownership of each family's personal space.
Okay. Now, one member said that they are a community that wants to help each other and work together, and that is true with almost all the polygamy groups. They claim that they reach out and help each other, and a lot of them do. I'm not saying anything against that. The membership built the roads, they built the school, and they built the store that's on their property, and they built their homes, but they built them on church land because that was the only land available. And the ownership of individual lots, however, is a piece of the pie that they claim the AUB owes to them. Okay, so we have a quote from the 1980s.
In the 1980s, much of the land in Pinedale was transferred to the ownership of Unified Industries, the for-profit arm of the AUB. Pinedale is largely residential, with one store, a school, a church, and several private businesses, most of which are on land owned by the UI or AUB. This arrangement means that taxes are paid in two parts. Residents are taxed directly on their homes, while taxes on the land are paid through a local UI/AUB bank account, which the plaintiffs contend is filled by the community's tithed dollars.
So you can see how this is going to steer up. Yeah, it is a very complicated problem. Now, their agreement was no problem for any of them until 2014, when Lynn Tampson, who was the leader of the AU group living in Salt Lake City, was accused by an adult daughter and two nieces of molesting them when they were children. Now, this is the prophet leader. Now, so distrust of the organization began, and some of the Pinedale residents chose to exit the group and take legal possession of their land on which their homes are built. Now, some of the residents who are suing the AUB complain that they are excluded from the town school and that they're being swindled.
An attorney representing the community members suing AUB, they just realized that they were bamboozled and swindled. And then they started looking at the money and realizing how much AUB gains. I mean, it's millions of dollars, millions. While 27 named plaintiffs are suing AUB, many others in the community, perhaps as many as a third, support the lawsuit and their efforts to break away from the church.
Now, we've pointed out in the past that the polygamy groups are great, lucrative, and incredulous pyramid schemes. Those at the top get all the money, and those who gave the money have to fight to retrieve their needs and to get what they need. And all too often, they fail getting back what they've invested. An attorney said that the legal question is somewhere between the AUB doctrine and the members' rights of ownership. Another quote.
They believe that the laws of consecration, as promised by Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, make them the rightful owners of the land their homes were built on. Possession is a more favorable legal premise to land ownership. AUB, on the other hand, is clinging to the premise that possessors can't own land unless they've paid the taxes.
Okay, so there's quite a lawsuit going on about this. Who's going to get the land and stay in their homes and so on. In 2017, the AUB representatives wrote letters to the Pinedale residents informing them they intend to subdivide the land and each resident would be allowed to purchase the lot their home is on. Now, we have to realize that in all this is a polygamous community. And one man may have several families living in different homes in this community. So we have to remember there's a lot of different things involved with this dispute. So the AUB informed them that they intend to subdivide the land, and so each resident would be able to purchase the lot that their home was on, but they were going to sell the lots for $18,000 each. Now, that brought contention, lawsuits and counter-lawsuits, and the AUB has vowed to add their legal costs to the $18,000 price of the individual lots.
Here we go.
Quote.
One resident said the AUB stopped the subdivision process because they don't want to give us our land anymore. Lynn Thompson, who denied the molestation allegations against him, died in 2021, and she contends that the current AUB head, David Watson, has decided that he wants to keep the ranch together in remembrance of the founders. Stephen Stoker, one of the resident plaintiffs, suspects AUB stalled the subdivision process because they want to charge fair market value for the lot, something that would likely fetch far more than $18,000.
And that sounds pretty more reasonable of why they would do that. Now, the AUB claims that the money in the form of tithing that the members gave to the church and it was tithing, and so it cannot be returned in the form of property, real property, that they cannot revoke the tithing gift, and besides that, the property is worth much more than the amount they tithed. So it's all money, isn't it? It's just money. Like that really makes God happy. And is so removed from the teachings of Jesus. It's hard to believe they call themselves followers of Christ without choking on their words. You know, he got a whip and whopped those people that were selling, and he isn't happy with this kind of thing. Polygamy groups are worth millions and millions of dollars, especially when the value of real property is taken into consideration. But just like too many wives is never enough, it seems like too much money and power is also never enough for these polygamous men. We also have a quote from the New Testament that speaks to this dilemma, and this is what Jesus said to a rich man who asked him how to enter the kingdom.
Matthew chapter 19, verses 21 through 23. Jesus said to him, "If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I say to you, only with difficulty will a rich person enter the kingdom of heaven." And then also from Luke 6:24, "But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation."
So hanging on to this money and getting more and more by the polygamy group leadership is really not a biblical concept according to Jesus.
No.
Now, Mormon polygamy groups all boast that they are God's true kingdom, his special people. But the group's leaderships keep the members in poverty while they become filthy rich. That's also true in the Kingston group, by the way. They need to heed what Jesus taught about being rich in money, but poor in God's truths. One member of the AUB group in Pinedale, who spoke anonymously, said this.
This is all from that same article. Same broadcast. The plaintiffs are suing to create our own story. Everything that we invest onto our property is our home. We want to be able to make the choice to further that down the road. Like to even be able to change directions in life and say you want to move to a different state. You can't sell your home on land that you don't own. Just because my dad or grandpa chose to live this way and subscribe to this ideal, we don't.
Okay. And that's a big thing. And your parents did it. You need to honor your parents and stay, stay where you are.
Stay true.
Yeah, right. Now, to add to this statement, it isn't God's design for people to live that way either. He never commands or condones the mistreatment, exploitation, greed, and deception of people in religion. The Old Testament, by the way, supports and records guidelines for personal property ownership. It's okay to own your own property. The polygamy groups need to pay attention to what God has given us as guidance for our lives, but they don't. Instead, they make their own ungodly rules. It'll be interesting. This thing may stay in court for several years. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Our next news is a story about an FLDS lady who escaped, and several years after she gets out, she tells her story. Now, anytime anyone can escape the emotional and spiritually deadly tentacles of the oppressive polygamy groups, it's a miracle. And we get this story from newsbreak.com dated March 4th, 2025. The link to the story is on the screen if you want to read it for yourself. It has an interesting conclusion, but a very sad beginning. Yeah. The lady's name is Angela Johnson. She was raised fourth generation of her family in the FLDS. Some of it was under Warren Jeffs. Angela was raised in the British Columbia faction of the FLDS polygamy group, and she lives now in Spokane, Washington. We quote,
Angela, now 38, was raised in a strict 1,500-person religious community in Bountiful, British Columbia, Canada, which has practiced polygamy for more than 70 years. Angela, who now lives in Spokane, Washington, said the group was completely cut off from the outside world, without internet, TV, mainstream music, or media. The mom of three, who was made to dress modestly at all times, said members lived in complete obedience to the church, and those who left were shunned by family and friends.
Now, as we've said before, if someone leaves the Mormon religion, their family and friends will often shun and disown that person. To some, that can be terribly traumatic. She tells about the lack of education, especially for the girls, and the forced marriages that most polygamy groups arrange, and how, at 16 years old, her marriage was arranged for her.
At just 16, Angela wed fellow FLDS member Kate Johnson, who she had briefly met twice before, but began having doubts about both her marriage and the religious sex weeks later. A snap from her wedding day shows a baby-faced Angela wearing braces in a white satin gown, smiling awkwardly while clutching her 19-year-old new husband's hand.
Okay, so we see the story developing here. Yeah, but this marriage took an unusual twist. At first, she was disillusioned. She called it a cult, which it is, but the polygamy group in Canada there, and made the decision to escape, and she did. She also planned to divorce her husband because it had been an arranged marriage. It wasn't her choice. And she, before she could divorce him, he also left the group. And he contacted her, and they began to form a friendship, which soon became genuine love, and so they stayed married.
That's a great story.
Married, so we quote.
The couple, who have now been together for 23 years and have 3 children, moved to America to rebuild their life away from the strict restrictions they grew up in. Angela said the cult, was very isolated from the outside world. We didn't have internet, TV, newspapers, or anything like that. We didn't get to listen to music that wasn't created by our people. We were required to dress how they wanted and have complete obedience to whatever the church asked of us. Most of the girls only went up to grade 10 at the private religious school because after that we were all married. We were taught that we were the chosen people. We were elite, and everyone else around us didn't know the way of God. I was born in complete fear of everyone who wasn't part of the religion. It was indoctrination after indoctrination that was the only way. Polygamy was one of the main parts of the religion. There was a hierarchy of men. The women were very oppressed and had to obey everything.
She pretty much sums up life in that polygamy group. And we say again, some polygamy groups are different than other groups. Some families within the groups are different from other families in the same group. But we tell the stories of the individuals as they're told to us. Now, she was raised to understand that she would marry who they told her to marry. So it didn't seem strange to her when she got married. And she said that even in their legal ceremony, they didn't even kiss. The bride and groom didn't even kiss. A few weeks into the marriage, though, reality set in. She began to question everything and questions if she even wanted to be married. She became rebellious. They don't like people asking difficult questions. It never sits well with the leadership. And that certainly was true in my experience as well. Anyway, we further tell this story.
It was a cardinal sin to even consider leaving. You were shunned from your family and friends. It's really scary because your whole life you've taught how bad the outside world is. I just kept thinking, there has to be more to life than this. I was the first one in my family to leave the religion. After fleeing the group, Angela had no plans to speak to her estranged husband again until discussions over divorce led to sparks flying in the relationship. Angela said uneducated me didn't realize I'd actually have to get a divorce. That's how I ended up finding Kate again to try and get a divorce so I could move on in life. We ended up talking and trauma bonding. I found out Kate had actually left the religion too and was living with friends.
So when she says trauma binding, evidently they were sharing traumas, but he also faced traumas. It's not just females that face problems in polygamy groups. Very often the males can as well. I know my brothers did. Whoa.
Well, and they were watching their mothers probably and their aunts and everything.
Well, there's a lot of control.
Struggle.
And you have to do you have to do this and that. And you can't date girls and all of the kind of things that young teenagers want to do. Now, this is a quote, and they lived happily ever after a kind of story. So when she and her husband got together to talk about a divorce, and they started getting along with each other, he asked her, shall we just give this a try since we're already married anyway? So they did. They became friends, and they've been married for more than 20 years. They have 3 children. He is a medical helicopter pilot, and she has an online clothing business. She said this.
It's amazing to think about what we went through together with a lack of support. We're really proud of what we've done. I'm proud of them too.
You bet. We are. And we're proud of them too. Whenever people can escape the bondage of the suffocating polygamy religion, it is a great thing. Our desire always is, will they look for and find the truth in Jesus Christ? Because the spiritual teachings they received inside the polygamy group are totally corrupted. They have turned God's truth into a lie. They've made Jesus the spirit brother of the devil. They've reduced the importance of Christ's death on the cross and invented their own way of salvation. So we're glad for them and hope they find the truth too.
Yep.
Now we have one more comment from a viewer that we want to address.
From a person named SC. Thank you for another informative video. Question. Is there any group who branched off the LDS Church that does not practice polygamy?
Now there's a lot who have, of course, broken off and practiced polygamy. But there is a book that has been written about the offshoots of the Mormon Church that Joseph Smith organized. The book is entitled Divergent Paths of the Restoration, written by Stephen L. Shields, and details over 200 churches that have branched off from the LDS Church. Now that's especially ironic since Joseph Smith himself said God's true church would not be split into factions. We quote.
Yeah, that's so bold. From Times and Seasons back in 1842. Upon inquiring the plan of salvation, I found that there is a great clash in religious sentiment. If I went to one society, they referred me to one plan, and another to another. each one pointing to his own particular creed as the summum bonum of perfection, considering that all could not be right and that God could not be the author of so much confusion, I determined to investigate the subject more fully, believing that if God had a church, it would not be split up into factions, and that if he taught one society to worship one way and administer in one set of ordinances, he would not teach in other principles which were diametrically opposed.
Now, there you have it.
Yep.
Okay, that's what Joseph Smith said. Now, it's true that God would not and does not teach contradictory doctrines and principles. Sadly, that's exactly what Mormonism has done. Mormonism contradicts the Bible and historically has contradicted itself as it continues to change as the culture changes. One of the most blatant contradictions is the nature of God. The Bible and the Book of Mormon state that there's only one God and that Jesus is God. Later, Smith himself taught there are uncountable gods and they needed to learn how to become gods themselves. Obviously, by his own contradictory teaching, Joseph Smith proved Mormonism is not from God. So, that's
fascinating
the
stuff.
latest.
Yeah.
in the polygamy dogma. Thank you, Earl.
You bet.
Appreciate
Thank you, Doris.
You bet. You know, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, that there are two ways to journey through this life, the wide way and the narrow way. He said, many are on the wide way and they will perish. Few are on the narrow way and it leads to eternal life. In John 14:6, Jesus said, he is the way. It doesn't say polygamy is the narrow way, or Mormonism, or the United Order. Jesus is the way. Jesus is preeminent. He is God's only mediator between you and God. He is God's only high priest. He alone saves sinners, and no one comes to the Father except through him. And that's the only way, and it is narrow. And Jesus said, few find it. To find something, you have to seek it. God also said that if you seek me with all your heart, he will be found by you. That's a great promise. Don't seek him through the filter of Mormonism, through polygamy, or through Joseph Smith. Jesus is the way, the only way. There is no other way. Seek God through Jesus. Also, all those who point to a different way or follow a different way will perish. That's what Jesus said. So seek him while he may still be found. Thank you for watching.